Plan A. Now, Plan A is what was mandated to us by the General Assembly, and it's what we all said we wanted to work towards. Maybe not all of us, but the great majority. At least enough to pass an appropriation bill. And the first thing we've got to do is analyze what we got, because we don't want to be making knee-jerk decisions about stuff. We got to examine the needs of, and I've looked at some of the data, and these are just the 3 I came up with. Y'all may come up with more. But I've talked to the folks over in Medicaid, and they agree we want to look at these, at least look at these folks. There are children in DDTCS centers who are not receiving PT/OT and speech. That does not come as a surprise to almost all of you. And it's a substantial number. It's 37%. I got a graphic here in a minute. I'll show you. The thing that might surprise you, though, is that's not uniform. If it was, then everybody would have about the same number, more or less. Or there might be a few outliers. But it's not. We got providers who have 90% of their kids don't get any therapy. We got providers who have less than 9% of their kids don't get any of this therapy. That makes me believe that there's probably an access issue, that those kids could get therapy if it was available in those areas. And if we have an access issue, we got a problem. Now, whether that means we pay more for therapy in areas that are where it's hard to get therapists, or that we come up with some other kind of intervention, but we probably need, if kids need therapy, we need to get it. We won't know unless we look. We've got children who are getting all 3 therapies. That's not going to surprise you either. We know we've got children, a lot of our children are like that. But that's not uniform either. So let's look at those children and see what they are. Are we making sure that their care is coordinated? Are they getting all 3 therapies for a year when perhaps 3 therapies for 6 months, and then 2 therapies for 6 more months with the help of a nutritionist or a nurse would be better? Let's take a look at those kids. And then this last one, children who simultaneously receive services at both the CHMS and the DDTCS. We've all heard, especially y'all that hang around DHS some, that is a huge issue. You can't get both. That's people gaming the system. Well, I didn't even make a graphic of it because it was so insignificant. 3.8% of the children served get that, both. And some of those may be children who started out over at Pediatrics Plus for 6 months and then moved out to Lone Oak, and so they go to Lone Oak Exceptional School now. That's simultaneous means they got it in the same year. We need to look. We still need to look because we need to make sure people understand. These are very expensive cases when they do that. And so we want to make sure we know why. That'll help us with some of our people who are a little skeptical about what we do. I've gone an entire hour without saying free daycare. Y'all know we get accused of free daycare all the time. And we've done a very good job of trying to dispel that myth. But we hadn't killed it yet. Let's use this opportunity to kill it. Okay? The first thing we're going to look at is the children who aren't getting any therapy. Overall, it's 24% of children are getting no OT, PT, or speech. It means 76% of the kids are at least getting one. Now, when we look at that by program, the CHMSs get 99% of their kids are getting therapy, and my CHMS friends will tell me that's because that's how you get in the program. And that's understandable. What concerns me, and I've already said, I used up all my talking points on that earlier slide, is I'm a little concerned about that 37% if, and I'll pick on somebody who's not here, and I don't know this, if somebody over in western Arkansas, if their children, maybe the majority of their children aren't getting any therapy. Now I can sit up at 7th and Main and go, well, they're just too lazy to go hire any therapist. Or they're taking kids that are so really high functioning, they're cherry picking, and they're taking the kids who don't need therapy. But that's me jumping to conclusions at 7th and Main in Little Rock. And one of the reasons that I am adamant that we look at this data and we analyze it is because we're not making policy like that. I'm not going to be a part of it. I'm not going to stand for anybody else to be a part of it. We're going to examine it. If it turns out that that's just the number of children that really have a delay but wouldn't benefit from OT, PT, and speech, that's fine. When we sit down and figure out how we're going to design our payment model, we'll put that in there as the lowest tier. Now, I know there's some outliers in there who might not need OT, PT, and speech, but need a whole truckload of nursing. And as we've said all along with payment improvement, people who are truly outliers, we'll deal with them on an individual basis. We're good at that. We know how to deal with people on an individual basis. We're not going to jump to conclusions. We're not going to let other people jump to conclusions. But to do that, we got to take a close look at what's going on. The most utilized habilitation services, and I think in the first work group I called these core services, and then I found out that core has a different meaning in CHMS than it does for DDTCS. But these are the things that are comparable. This is what people who are a little bit negative towards what we do call free daycare. In DDTCS, it's called preschool services. It's an hour. You can do 5 hours a day. That's mandated in code that you can't do more than 5, but you can do 5. 16 something a unit. In CHMS, it's broken. Basically, there's 3 codes. And the average cost, once you figure out, because two of them are more expensive than the other, or I got that backwards. Either way, it comes out to about $19 an hour. But you can only do 3.75 hours a day, averaged over 6 months. Initially, remember there was a big uproar over, we got kids being billed 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Well, some of that was CHMS providers. They were just billing the amount of time the kids were there for the first 3 months of the PA, and then not billing anything for the last 3 months, but the kids getting the same thing. Had we had a limit on days, it would have come out and looked just like that. Because when we look at those HAB services, and I know these are awkward slides, and some of y'all are wondering, why he looks like he got off down a rabbit trail here. But I had to have this slide in here because I wanted to show that the fundamental framework of why we have clinic-based services cost about the same regardless of where you are. I think there's a few $100 difference there for DDTCS and CHMS. That's not the issue. The issue is the therapy. And if what we have is that CHMSs, because of the way they do business and the way that the state has set up for them to do business, is they have to take therapy-heavy individuals, children, then that would be a natural thing for them to be more expensive because therapy is more expensive. If what we have is an access issue, well, then we need to solve that. All right, I better get back over here where my notes are before I get completely lost, if I'm not already. I know I was going to ask questions, I promise you. All right, we finally got to the page. That's not it. That is. Now, on one more thing, we're talking about looking at therapy. By their nature, CHMS kids are going to get more therapy. You can see half of their children get 3 therapies. Only 22% of children in a DDTCS who get therapy. This does not count the 37% that aren't getting any. More kids get 1 kind of therapy in a DDTCS. And I'm doing all this to show there are differences that we've got to resolve as we come together. But I also want to give y'all the ability to defend both types of program. Either way, at the end of the day, kids are getting therapy. What we've got to do is ensure that if you need 2 therapies, you're getting 2 therapies. If you need 3, you're getting 3. If you don't need any, you don't need any. We just got to make sure you're eligible to get in the door. Okay. Let me see what else I was supposed to talk about before I stop and ask for questions. The last thing I wrote down here was to remind everybody, let's not draw conclusions from what I'm showing you. I'm not going to make decisions based on just this data. I don't want y'all to do that. And don't let anybody else do it. Let's wait till we look at the children's plans. Look at the children's evaluations. When we talked to Medicaid about having a contractor do all this examining, because obviously we don't have the staff. Medicaid didn't have the staff. And they kept saying, oh, we're going to do audits. And I said, well, you can call them what you want to, but I don't care too much. I know y'all do at Medicaid, but I'm not that excited about knowing whether all the signatures are in the right page and whether they're dated correctly and all that. I know that's important, but that's not what I want to know for what we're doing. What I want to know is the kids in that block, do they need therapy? And have we set up a system that disincentivizes them to get it? Because we will not pay for a therapist to drive an hour. And if we have set that up, then we've got a problem with the federal government who pays 70% of our bills. If that's the case, we at the state need to fix that. I don't want us jumping to conclusions because I promise you there are people who are looking at this going, 37% of the kids don't even need to be there. They could be in an ABC school. That's free daycare. If you think I made that up, you're wrong. Heard that more than once, and I understand. But I also understand that we're not going to make decisions based off of just this amount of data. Now, let me get back to, here's what we're going to talk about next, but let me stop here and ask if there are any questions about what we've covered. That was a complicated mess. If y'all knew how many slides I originally had in that section, you'd pass out because it was about 3 times that many. Mark George. What, Anna? Did you wake up? I know. Poor Anna said, well, I know, but we want the people in Jonesboro and Fort Smith to be able to hear you and the other places.
I would suspect it would be a low number or low percentage, but is there any way to determine how many children in the age group we're talking about receive 1 or more therapy sessions but are not in either a CHMS or a DDTCS?
Yes, sir. We actually have that data. And let me issue this general disclaimer about data. This is a huge number of children with a huge number of claims. I'm never going to go to court and say, absolutely, the MMIS system said 14,706 children got therapy, and that's exactly the number that got it. I will say that after I see that data run 2 or 3 times, and it's always around there, that I have some confidence in it. It's a huge system. Depending on how you ask the question, you can get numbers. But we have that data that's at least as good as the data I've showed you. But right now, and I didn't have a slide in here that explained it very well, or I did and I threw it out. The clinic-based stuff is what we've got to make a pretty quick decision on because that's what draws the most attention over at Medicaid, and that's what will draw the most attention everywhere. because it's the expensive part. $250 million. The number of children that the Tracy's First Connections program serves and that our standalone therapists serve is substantial, but it's nothing compared to this. So our first task is to do this. And I just don't feel like we have the resources to attack both things at once. But we will talk about that, Mark, I promise.
If coordination is important, and I think you're right, it could be there is access for therapies in localities, but not for the clinics.
That's true. And I think that's something the group's going to have to talk about. And let me tell you, when we ran the therapy numbers, it didn't matter where you got to therapy. If you went to Pediatrics Plus for your clinic-based service, but you went to Central Arkansas Therapy Company for your therapy, you got counted because the population was kids who were either in a DDTCS or a CHMS. Anybody else in here? All right, anybody at our remote sites? Anybody still awake? Oh, I'd have had time for all my other slides. I should have brought them. I got way too excited about this. I met with some people last week and I did a little preview on this thing. And I had way too much information because I have focused on the pre-K issue in between running over the Capitol every 10 minutes. That's all I've been doing. All the folks at DDS are tired of me wanting to talk about the preschool stuff because they're not working on it. They're working on the adults and the school age payment improvement and trying to run the agency. And I'm sitting in there making preschool slides and getting on the phone and asking questions. I've talked to more therapists in the last month than I ever thought I would, pestering them to death about billing and how do you get in, how do you get out. They're tired of it, but I love talking about it now. Okay, step 2 of Plan A, we've analyzed. Now we can do some of these simultaneously. We don't have to wait till step 1's over. Step 2 is developing our core principles. That'll be the easy part, I think. If it's not easy, we're not doing it right. The good thing about our wide and varied network of providers is that they can all agree on one thing. They love children who have disabilities and delays. They care about them. I dare you to go in any of these places and not see a majority of the staff have that look on their face that tells you they're working in the right place. So our core principles aren't going to be that hard to do. But since I get paid to do stuff, I had to do stuff. Now, I took this one off of Work Group 1 slide. A comprehensive and integrated plan of care is our core. That's been our core for 35, 40 years, ever since we started special education way back. You got to have an integrated plan of care. There's a lot of moving parts when you're talking about taking care of somebody with a disability. And they got to be coordinated and integrated. And it's got to be comprehensive. An easy example is dental care. It doesn't matter how good an occupational therapist or physical therapist or a special ed teacher or nutritionist does. If somebody's got a wisdom tooth that's killing them, but they don't have the ability to communicate that to you, most of y'all know what'll happen. They'll start having mental health problems because they're acting out because their tooth hurts. And if their tooth hurts, they can't eat. And when they can't eat, they develop physical problems associated with not eating. And we have clinicians, and clinicians respond. And well, eventually, what are you going to get to? Tube feeding. Tube feeding's got a whole long list of problems associated with that, all because maybe somebody didn't have a comprehensive plan. Or worse, in some cases, they had a comprehensive plan, couldn't find a dentist. But we got to solve that problem.